15 miles from Jerusalem rests a sun-scourged plain, bordered by rocky mountains and perilous cliffs. In 1947, a Bedouin boy, while searching for a strayed goat, cast a stone among the cliffs into a cave. To his surprise, he heard the sound of shattering pottery. On this program, Zola Levitt examines the remarkable find taken from that cave, the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Shalom, hello again. Now you may remember in early November we made a program on the newly released text of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The November 8th newspaper had the article about the scrolls released, and several scholars who'd spoken up about new texts that were very exciting. And we made the program that day, and by November 9th you saw it on the FAM network and so on around the country. And we quoted from newspapers. I had said on that program, something I rarely do is read the newspaper, but we wanted to make that show so fast. After these scrolls have been virtually suppressed for 40 years, there was no time to lose to get the wonderful news out. And we read right from the newspaper, and one paragraph that I read had to do with a certain professor. It says, if the translations of the fragments is correct, the text is very significant, said James Tabor, a University of North Carolina associate professor of Christian origins and ancient Judaism. It tightens the connection tremendously between the early Christians and the people who wrote the scrolls. Now that's exciting, and I'm going to come back to you right after this with Professor James Tabor. I'm going to do something I rarely do on a program. I'm going to read from the daily newspaper. The article appeared in the Dallas Morning News. Dead Sea Scrolls mention death of Messianic leader, and the New York Times reference to execution of Messianic leader is found in scrolls. I'm going to read from the Dallas paper because it's more complete, and the New York Times, curiously, omitted all reference to Scripture. The Morning News listed out all the Scripture. I find that interesting. In any case, the article went this way. The dateline is Associated Press from Los Angeles. Newly released text from the Dead Sea Scrolls mentions the execution of a Messianic leader, suggesting that some ancient Jews shared the Christian concept of the slaying of a Messiah, scholars said Thursday. And so, from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte is Professor James Tabor. And thank you very much for joining us.
It's good to be with you today.
It's great to have a principal exponent of a new idea with you because you can get it straight from the beginning. Now, you have three texts about Messiah that we can discuss.
Right.
And the first one is what we call the slain Messiah text.
Yeah, that's the one that caused all the stir last month.
This was in the newspaper.
That's right.
Can you enlighten us then?
Yeah, before I do the three, I'm going to also show you something officially. This is brand new. It's only been out about a week. In fact, I had it sent overnight UPS to have it for this show. This is, I guess you could say, the bootleg edition of the unpublished scrolls.
Right. This is the one that made out of the...
Dr. Robert Eisenman and James Robinson at Claremont. Eisenman is at Long Beach State. They obtained the photographs.
Wait, and these little fragments, somebody had to stitch all that together?
It's 1,657 fragments, similar to the ones we're going to talk about. Who knows what's in them all. Never been seen before. In fact, I'm sure this book has never been seen before on television until now. Some of them will be impossible to decipher, they're very small. Others you can read if you know Hebrew just quite easily. So there's this is only in Hebrew, so it is available, but unless you know Hebrew, there might not be a lot of point in getting it. But the point is all the unpublished material is now out and available to any scholar who wants
Somebody who can read that can now see for himself.
In fact, the first two scrolls I'm going to show you, let's start with this first one, which we call the Slain Messiah text that made the newspapers that you did the story on November the 8th. I doubt, I don't want to be over dramatic, but I doubt until this show whether more than a dozen people have seen this, because it was given to a team of scholars, or only certain people have seen it. and now anybody can see it.
And then they've held on to it for some 40 years.
It's going to go on television right now.
Sure.
So.
Okay, folks, we're going to show you what for 40 years this team of so-called scholars has suppressed, and now it's out.
And many of them were good scholars. I don't want to say that, but for whatever reason, it's out. We're glad it's out. Now, it's a small fragment right here in the center of the page. It has other parts to it, but this is the fragment we're interested in, and I've got a blow-up, actually, of that middle fragment right here. And I think with a little bit of work we can read it together, and I actually want to go over it word for word because every word is quite interesting. It starts out, you can probably make that out.
Yeshayahu.
Yeah, Isaiah, the prophet, Hanavi. And now this word we're not sure of, but then it begins to quote Isaiah 11:1, which is a text about the Messiah. It says, there's the verb yatzah, there will come forth a staff or
branch,
not a branch, but a stem from the Geza, from the root of Jesse. There's Jesse there. And then it goes on to say, this is kind of the striking phrase, Tzemach, the branch of David. So it goes from Isaiah 11 to probably maybe Jeremiah or Zechariah. Remember, there are references to the Messiah also being called the branch. So the branch of David. So very strongly branded as a Messianic text, quoting probably, definitely Isaiah, probably Jeremiah, maybe Zechariah. And then it says something, it's difficult to say for sure, but something like, they will be judged. So perhaps that the branch of David will judge the world, or maybe that they will judge him. By the way, I'm reflecting the help of Professor Michael Weiss, who discovered this text in the photographs and his translation and the variables that I'm giving you here. Then very clearly it talks, you can see the word, there's a mem and a vav and a tet in Hebrew, which is the verb for to die. So this was the key verse that really kind of shocked people. It says, they will put him to death, or he will be put to death, the prince of the congregation, the Nasi, the prince of the congregation. Remember, the Messiah is also called the prince in Daniel. So it probably means the prince of the congregation will be put to death. They will put him to death.
Messiah, the prince, Daniel 9.
Exactly. Now notice that. That's a tzadi and a mem, but the other word is dropped out. But look, we have that right here. Tzemach again. Others, that is the branch. So they will put to death the prince of the congregation, the branch. I think one letter gone, but probably that's what it says. Then with woundings or piercings, see that? You can see halal there. With woundings or piercings, and then you go to this word, the priest will command, or the priest will command woundings and piercings. Seems to say then that they will put this Nasi, or this Tzemach, this branch, to death. So that's what all the stir was about. Suddenly we had a text from Qumran that clearly talks about the Messiah being suffering or being slain. That seems to be a valid interpretation. The verdict is somewhat out because we want to work on these other fragments. Maybe there are other materials that go with this, but that seems pretty clear, as you could see even from the Hebrew there. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, let me certify for the audience, I'm not a Hebrew scholar by a long shot, but I can follow what's written there, and it's exactly as Professor Tabor's translated. The bigger question, of course, this was written down by the people in the Qumran caves. They weren't necessarily believers in the sense of they saw the activities of, let's say, Jesus for the sake of argument. And they weren't writing a religious text. They seemed to be reacting to events. They report the death of a leader of the community, etc. And they choose to refer to Isaiah's messianic prophecies to help identify this person that died. And the woundings and piercings is out of Isaiah 53, so on. It rings a familiar chord to them. The big question then, could this simply be referring to Jesus?
Yeah. We can't say who it refers to because he doesn't give a name. I see two possibilities. One would be that they have put text together, that they've taken a text like Isaiah 53 about the suffering of a servant of God, as well as a text like Isaiah 11 about the branch of David or the king, put them together. I think that's unlikely, though, because even in the New Testament, in the Gospels, you have the disciples presented as not putting that together. They react to the event. Then they say, well, we know he was the Messiah, but he was slain. Oh yeah, it must mean this and this. And they went back and found those texts, you know, these suffering texts. I think it's much more likely that the latter happened, that what we very well might have here, I'm not positive, but we might have a text written in actual reaction to the wounding or piercing or slaying of a figure that this group had great hope in. But to say it's Jesus, of course, that's going beyond the evidence. Although we can now say, if this translation holds, that this group also was thinking in terms of the suffering Messiah as well as the king.
Yeah, at least they had the teaching that Messiah came to suffer, to intercede.
They seem to have that. Now, sometimes you'll hear people say, well, Judaism teaches that. There's the Mashiach ben Yosef, the suffering servant. But you see, that's late. That's late in the Talmud and in other midrashic materials. This is an early text. You cannot show, I don't know of a Hebrew text in the Midrash, the Talmud, the Mishnah, you know, these ancient Jewish sources, this early that talks about Messiah being pierced or slain. So this, other than the New Testament, this is it. But what it means is that other Jewish groups of the time were also in some way discussing something like this.
It isn't a big stretch for me to say somebody lived at this time before 50 A.D. He died or was killed with woundings and piercings. The people down at Qumran who had no axe to grind one way or another, that he made them think about the Messianic prophecy of Isaiah, cries out to be Jesus of Nazareth.
I want us to do...
but that's not scientifically established.
I want us to do another show on the identity of Qumran and Christianity. Maybe we can get into that even more.
We will do it. I would love to do it. Okay. Let me go to another text, and that's the so-called Raising the Dead text, which this is your discovery. Dr. James Tabor discovered this one, and it's very clear. I've looked at it. It has a direct reference to the Gospel of Luke.
In some fashion, it seems to. Okay. Now, this text was published in Bar Magazine, Biblical Archaeology Review, about the last issue, the current issue, actually. But before that, I had not seen it. It's in the unpublished scrolls, so no one else has seen it. I'm sure it's never been on television before. And it's got some interesting lines. There are 13 lines. We won't do them all, but I did want you to notice, because you do read Hebrew here, this is very clear. This is the end of the word. The heavens and the earth will obey. See Shema there. Just like the Shema, or Shema, and then La Mashiach, his Messiah.
His Messiah.
So it starts out in this column talking about a time, a Messianic era. So what this text has to do with is a description of what will happen when the Messiah comes. It just gives a description of their expectations, essentially. And some of them are commonplace. I've got a translation here I'll read. For example, it says that the Lord will visit the pious and the righteous he will call by name. Over the poor will his spirit hover, and the faithful he will support with strength. But as you get down to about line 8, which is right here, I think you'll recognize some of this language. He will release the prisoners, make the blind see, and raise up those bent in the dust. Now, I'm going to put this down a minute and come back, but you've got an English Bible there. If you read, I'll just let you turn to it. Read Luke chapter 4.
Okay, Luke 4:18.
Yeah.
The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord.
Okay. Now, if you look at some of the phrases we just read about release the prisoners, make the blind see, and raise up those bent in the dust, that is an allusion to the Psalms. In fact, it's Psalm 146, but also to, in Luke 4, this is where Jesus gets up in the synagogue and reads Isaiah 61. And the key phrase is the one you just read. Now, here's what this text says. Let's compare it. It says, he will heal, here you have Rapha, he will heal the wounded, and he will make the dead live, the verb chaya, to live, like l'chaim, you know, in Jewish parlance. So he'll make the dead live, and to the poor he will preach the gospel. So what you have here is quite striking. You've got a partial quotation of Isaiah 61, which you're reading here.
But it didn't say make the dead live.
That's it. That's what I noticed immediately, that if you read Isaiah 61, the key phrase is that he will make the blind see, release the prisoners, and to the poor announce the good tidings, you know, the gospel.
Yes.
But if you turn over to Luke 7, just a couple pages over there, and this is a passage that we believe, in scholarly parlance, we call this the Q source. This is a very early source that Luke himself used. He says that remember in his preface, he says that he has looked at different sources and so forth. We believe that this is an early source he used, and I think it's around, you see verse
I see verse 22, tell him to go. Yeah, he asks, are you he that was to come, or do we look for another?
What it is John the Baptist, who's usually identified with this community in some fashion, he's out in the wilderness, same place, baptizing.
Yeah.
You know, if you've been to Qumran, you know you can look and see the river, the Dead Sea and the Jordan River area. He's asking Jesus, are you the Messiah, or should we look for another? Now read, what is it, verse 22, where we have Jesus reply.
Yeah, then Jesus answering said unto them, go your way and tell John what things ye have seen and heard, how that the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, to the poor the gospel is preached.
Okay. Notice the last two phrases. The dead are raised, to the poor the gospel is preached. Now, it's partly then from Isaiah 61, but as you immediately noticed, Isaiah 61 does not say that the Messiah, when he comes, will raise the dead. It mentions many of these other things. Yeah. And yet Luke's record of what Jesus told John the Baptist includes this phrase. Now, here's how I would see the significance of this. I think that Jesus is answering John in what I would call coded language. That is, they know what they're talking about. Signs of the Messiah. Built on these scriptures, such as Isaiah, the Psalms, but with this added phrase, raise the dead, as kind of the real key, you see. And
he's saying to them, you tell John this, listen carefully. And he quotes from a commentary written at Qumran that John would
maybe John would know, and maybe Jesus himself knew. That in other words, the groups are sharing this common belief, and it's not just a general belief, it's a very specific belief. Tick it off. He will do this, he will do this, including raise the dead.
I identify myself as Messiah to you, John, by this code.
By the well-known criteria that we now can see. And so I'm not saying Luke is quoting this or this is quoting Luke. I'm saying they're both quoting a well-known and well-understood, very patterned language, you see. Yeah. And I think this is the first absolutely tight linguistic connection of the New Testament. There are lots of phrases like New Covenant and so forth, but this is tighter than that. This is literally down to who's the Messiah, what will he do? We read Luke, here's an answer. We read this text, here's an answer. I think it's fascinating.
Dr. Tabor, this is quite a discovery.
Yeah. Another thing is we do not have clear references to the Qumran community believing in resurrection of the dead. In fact, that's debated among the scholars. Did they or did they not have that as part of what we call their eschatology, their view of the end? And as you know, in the New Testament, resurrection of the dead is the key doctrine. Paul makes it a big point in the book of Acts. You know, I believe in the resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15, you know, is very strong on that. This is one of our strongest indications that they do believe. There are allusions elsewhere, but this is absolutely clear in Hebrew. There's no doubting the reading. He will make live, literally, the dead ones.
Yeah, that's very clear.
So I think it's quite a fascinating text.
Very nice. Now, the Isaiah 53:11 text, which is about Messiah and the light.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Now, we're going here from unpublished, which is now published. I say unpublished meaning till last week.
Yes.
The two we just looked at, they're published now because Barr has put them out. But this Isaiah scroll, Isaiah 53, of course, has been known for centuries. It's in everybody's Bible.
This is he goes as a lamb to the slaughter. By
That's right, that's right. The servant. And it's variously interpreted. Is it Messiah? Is it the people of Israel? Is it a righteous servant, a tzaddik, you know, of Israel? But anyway, this is Isaiah 53, beautiful text in Hebrew, of, as you know, in Cave 1, first discoveries made by the Bedouin shepherd boy. This whole scroll was found, complete scroll of Isaiah. Yeah. And you've seen it, I think, have you not?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, because you did that
program. I was in the museum there. Yeah.
And I think you demonstrated that a modern Israeli can simply sight read this. It's that clear. It's
Sure,
absolutely
it's
clear.
very easy to read.
Now, so this is not an unpublished text, but it's an interesting text. Now, people often ask, when you compare the Isaiah of Qumran, which is 2,000 years old or more, and the Isaiah text that we have today, copies of copies of copies, medieval Hebrew manuscripts, are there major differences? The answer is no. But there are some significant differences, and one of them I wanted to talk to you about is in verse 11 here. You have English Isaiah 53, verse 11. This would be the common King James translation of Isaiah 53:11. Go ahead and read
He
it.
shall see of the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied.
Okay. We'll just take that phrase. If you notice in Hebrew here, this is literally from the travail, there's nephesh, of his soul. He will see.
Okay.
Now, the word I've circled here is the direct object. He will see what? Light.
Or
That's not in your text you just read. Now, if you don't have the word light, you would have to translate it from the travail of his... read it again. I'm getting mixed up.
yeah, it's
what they did with that.
He shall see of the travail of his soul.
Yeah, which in a way doesn't make sense. See, he will see from the travail of his soul. Well, what will he see, you see?
Yeah.
So in the Qumran scroll, you have the word light. He will see light. Now, I think this is an allusion to resurrection. For this reason, Isaiah in chapter 27 and in other places uses light as a metaphor for raising the dead. The dead are in Sheol and darkness, and they see light. And this is talking about a man suffering, being buried, and then seeing light, you see. So the point would be that this word light was in copies of Isaiah from the 1st century, during the time of Jesus, during the time of Paul, during the time of the early rabbis. Apparently was in their copies. And now here's a modern Hebrew Bible upon which the King James was based, Masoretic text, standard text, in which the word light is missing.
Now,
So,
historically, some people don't like the resurrection for different reasons. One group because it's too hard to believe. Let's not make the people try to believe that's going to happen. Another group because it's written of Jesus and they don't like the idea.
Right.
Could it be possible the Masoretes, the ones who prepared this Masoretic text, altered an original text?
I think we just have to say that in the oldest Hebrew version it exists, in the Masoretic text it doesn't, and just leave it to scholarly judgment beyond that.
But you have a
this
photograph
is a sensitive
here.
text, though. It's
Okay.
a very sensitive text,
All
there's
right.
no doubt about it.
I'm looking at
And
a page.
It did become sensitive in Jewish-Christian disputes. That's clear.
Yeah.
It's not read in the synagogue today. It's not one of the Haftorah readings. It's skipped, in fact. You read Isaiah 52 and you go to 54.
Why is that?
I think because of the slaughter of the Jews by so-called Christians, and it became very sensitive to, in the medieval times.
He goes
these
as a
debates,
lamb to the
it's-
slaughter. Still in all, it seems Christological on the surface, almost anybody
That's how
would.
Christians have understood it, and some Jews have understood it that way. I'm also going to add this, because I want to stick with the 1st century. Here's a 1st century text. It does have it. I think that Paul, in his letter to Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 15, he says that the Christ, the Messiah, died, was buried, and was raised. And then he adds this phrase after each one, according to the Scriptures, which means the Hebrew Bible.
He read it somewhere.
Now, where does it say in the Hebrew Bible that the Messiah will be raised from the dead? I can't think of a place, clearly. Not like this.
No, not
So
as
it
clear as
could
that.
be that he's referring to this text. I am persuaded that he is, because this text talks about burial, death, clearly, burial, and now with this reading, it also talks about somebody seeing light. Now, all I'm saying is I think that was Paul's interpretation.
Haven't I cornered you? Haven't you just said Paul picked up a Bible and it said light in there? We pick up
I think
a
it's
Bible
likely that,
and it's not in there.
I think it's likely that his text said light. And
so slight
it,
alteration.
Yeah.
Boy, an important one though.
It's an interesting one, and and by the way, the New International Version, which many people go in a bookstore, look, has put it back in.
Put it back in.
And the new RSV that just came out last year, no, it just came out this year, has put it back in. So the two latest modern scholarly versions have included this reading. So
how do they sit with Jewish scholars that...
they're well respected. In fact, Jews were on the committee of the new RSV. I think scholarly Jews are interested in text, they're not interested in debating theology. So if the text has it, and this seems to be the oldest reading, why not put it back in?
This is what
we can still debate what it means, but it's in. I think basically it's in. And I wouldn't, in fact, the newer Jewish versions will eventually footnote it, I think, as time goes on. We're in an era now of open discussion. These are Jewish texts I'm showing you. These aren't Christian texts.
No,
all three of these are thoroughly Jewish texts.
Yeah.
And yet they're talking about things that Jews and Christians have in common and need to discuss.
And one problem we're going to take up on our future programs together is the sticky area of these are Jewish texts found in West Bank locations and controlled by Christian scholars. This is a weird area of modern, you know, I think of Daniel 12:4, knowledge will increase in the end. I'm sure he means spiritual knowledge. And these Dead Sea Scrolls, to me, this just makes me bounce in my seat. I mean, I've never seen anything so exciting.
They're fascinating. With these texts, as I was telling my students the other day, I have enough to do now for a lifetime, just working on these scrolls.
What a nice... and stay with me, will you? I'll chronicle everything you find out. This is wonderful. I'm honored that you came forward and joined us, and we're going to pass this knowledge along. And you'll be here for 2 more programs in which we're going to discuss still more
other aspects.
Yeah, aspects of these finds. So Dr. James Tabor, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, he's Associate Professor of Ancient Judaism and Early Christianity, and thanks so much for joining us.
It's good to be with you.
Well, now 24 people, and you have seen these Dead Sea Scrolls that are pictured in the newly released volumes. I'm so glad if you watch this program, and we're going to, of course, have this program and the others with Dr. Tabor and about the Dead Sea Scrolls on video so that you could get them. These are programs. I realize there's a lot coming at you in a program like this if you're not a scholar of these things, and I'm not myself, and the videos will be available for study. Our offer actually is the Levitt Letter Extra book. Now, we've taken the Levitt Letter Extra, our publication that goes by first class mail, and put it in the form of a book. And this book is all of the LLXs that started when Saddam Hussein entered Kuwait, and they go right up to the end of 1991. A period of prophecy fulfillment, if you look at it that way, or world events, politics, that is among the most fascinating anyone could live through. The book is $12. You can get it at our post office box, or you can call in with a credit card at our phone number. $12, just ask for the LLX book. And if you take the Levitt Letter Extra, you may want to have this complete collection, or if not, you may want to catch up with this. Those Dead Sea Scrolls books we showed are available too. Write to us and we'll tell you how to get them. We don't offer them, we don't own them, but we'll tell you how to get them. But mind you, they're in Hebrew, they're hard to read. You need to be a scholar. Folks, help us, and Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.